Can you imagine a Russian speaking before the president and after the Bulgarian, exactly, and discussing authoritarianism when we officially have a sovereign democracy? Thank you.
This conference is the largest international conference on security and politics that has ever took place in Estonia.
I think what we have to do, my main point is that we need to deal with ourselves. We have to deal with ourselves, not actually deal with what's going on in the countries that are problematic, because we are the ones that, in fact, they need us to be corrupt for them to continue getting their money.
No, but corruption is like Nokia. It connects people.
We try to keep it very informal and very frank, very relaxed and very lively.
Looking on my own country or the Baltic experience from 1992, when we started our way back to Europe, looking back, I am enormously happy that there was no neighborhood policy existing in this time in Europe. Otherwise, I was really afraid we can sit here now. Georgia is not very interested on very much promises. Georgia is interested to have real sex. But Europe is looking in this moment like a really old man who is looking, who's maybe touching and talking, but no sex available.
One of the problems with Western diplomats is that they don't know how to say no. It's part of the role of a diplomat to believe that all problems and all contradictions can be solved with something that particularly diplomats from my own country, I'm Swedish, are fond of calling dialogue. This is the idea that if reasonable people sit down on each around a table, any problem can be solved. Well, that's not true. There are irreconcilable differences. We are not very good at defending our own values because we don't know them well enough. Why don't we know them well enough? Because they haven't been challenged in hard time situations for decades.
Well, the conference is supposed to be about the security of the Nordic-Baltic region, and we hope to raise the importance of that region. And we invite everyone who has interesting or important things to say about that region.
I remember when the enlargement of the Baltic states was discussed. The Russian Democrats were also against it. And they made arguments which were very similar to the arguments of the Kremlin at that time.
Conferences like Lennart Meri conference are a very good opportunity to pose the questions exactly as we see the questions.
Last question just behind.
Pietro Roos, Estonian Business Daily Äripäev. I wanted to ask you all if you would invest your personal own money in Russia, and where and why or why not? Thank you.
Thank you. My personal money, I don't have so much money to invest, but I know I have no intention to invest to Russia because I know that this is a political price and I am not ready to pay this price.
On the question of where to invest, I think that as the Russians say, time is money, and I've invested nearly 20 years already. Maybe it's enough.
Where to invest money? That's very interesting, because if you would ask, let's say, managers of Rosneft or Gazprom, the answer is very clear. They invest in Switzerland, in Britain, in Marbella, in Spain, and not only them, many other people from my former colleagues.
Normally always we have had 1 or 2 sessions about Russia because Russia is inevitably a big player here and somewhat problematic one, let's face it. Then there have been topics related to NATO, European Union, transatlantic relations, always something also about the Middle East.
They would be growing tomatoes if that's what the West were buying. They're only growing the opium because people are using it in its refined form in Western countries.
But it's not quite as profitable to grow tomatoes.
No, exactly. I'm saying, but there's no demand. Yeah. There's no demand. Then, and it's purely
the reason why price for heroin is high because it is illegal.
No, but I mean,
this is a Dutch national.
But the point is that there's basically we sit here in the West finger wagging. Terrible Afghan farmers. How can you do that? It's immoral and so on. Totally. Yes, all of those things are true. but they're only growing it because it's being consumed somewhere else.
Finally, about real politics and oil. Yes, the Chinese are mainly interested with oil. And that's one of the reasons they have very discreetly put some kind of pressure on Iran, just because the Chinese do not want the total disruption of the Middle East. And that's pure, egoistic, real politics, but it can work.
Yeah. A statement by Einstein, who once said that politics is much more difficult than physics. And I think politics in the Middle East is much more difficult than politics anywhere else.
But apart from that, and apart from intellectual activity, we also try to offer some culture. Last year it was a concert by Arvo Pärt. The composer himself was present, interacted with conference participants. And also a very successful feature of our conference has been town excursion conducted by our former Prime Minister Mart Laar. Why is it Lennart Meri conference? Well, he's probably the biggest ever statesman there has been in Estonia, or at least his time was very fruitful. He rose to the top at exactly the time when his skills and talents were necessary.
I'm sure that others in the room have the same experience that I had in those years. That very late at night, you might have gone to bed, suddenly the telephone rang. You picked up the telephone, nobody said anything, you could hear a very heavy breathing by somebody who probably smoked too many cigarettes. Then a deep sigh, and then I always said, "Hi, Lennart, how is life? How are things?" Uffe said, "I have so many problems." And then he started to talk about those problems, discussing with himself. I only had to say yes. Oh, why? Well, yes. And then he discussed with himself, and on the one hand, he became more and more optimistic and agitated. And then in the end he would say, "Oh, it was so wonderful speaking to you, because you brought me in such a much better mood. Now I'm more optimistic." And then he had convinced himself, well, Lennart, he was the indefatigable bumblebee. He didn't know that he couldn't fly, but he was flying all the time.